Oh no, the webcam has crashed. Okay, everybody, I am sorry. Just as I started the webcam, my webcam has crashed. Hold on, I'm going to try to reset the webcam. Okay, this is not good. Sorry guys. I'm gonna have to try to do a little bit of a workaround here. But my camera just does not seem to all of a sudden be working. My camera has just died. Come on. Sorry guys. I don't know what's wrong here. My camera has just decided to freeze up and just stop working completely. And there seems to be nothing I can do about it. I'm going to try to. Sorry, everyone. I'm going to try to reload Streamlabs. It might be that this live feed. Okay, hi everyone. I think we've solved the issue. I don't know what happened, but my streaming software just decided to crash the webcam. Okay, but I think we're up and running now. Just making sure I have sound, and it all looks like it's going pretty good. Okay, so welcome to the new Foil Talk. This is essentially a whole new format for me. Some of you known that I've been doing sort of a bit of a live review thing, and now I've decided to do a bit more in the sense of helping out the people wanting to get into the sport, also a bit of coaching, and just basically helping you guys to get into foiling, improve with foiling, and really just being there for you guys. So, for your questions. So, today's topic is essentially how to get started with foiling, and that's getting started in general with all foiling disciplines. In the last 10 years, foiling has really grown into a massive industry, and there are a lot of disciplines now. When I started almost 12 years ago now, over 12 years ago now, actually 13 years now, there was kite foiling. That was pretty much it. And there was a little bit of tow in surf foiling going on. And now we've got wing foiling, dock starting, rock starting, windsurf foiling, kite foiling, just normal pump foiling, downwind foiling, surf foiling, sup foiling. We've got all these different disciplines. However, for me at least, foiling is foiling. So when it comes to the learning process, this essentially will remain the same across all the different disciplines. So the first thing I'm going to talk about at the moment is the question I get asked a lot is, which is the easiest foiling sport to learn? Yeah. Is it wing foiling? Is it wind foiling? Should I learn behind a boat? Can I go straight into dock starting? So for me, I found the easiest foiling sport to learn is wake foiling behind a boat. The boat can control the speed. Nowadays, with the big foils and the big boards, the boats don't even have to pull that hard. And so you can slowly learn to control the board with the foil underneath, slowly learn your takeoffs. And you can always just let go of the handle if it gets a bit scary, and the crashes are very, very easy. Next along, if you don't have the option of learning behind the boat, I would say wing foiling is the next sort of easiest way to learn. It does have the added difficulty of being a wind sport, so you do need a decent amount of wind to learn. However, it's one of those sports where you can slowly work your way into the sport without too much hassle. So you can learn to fly the wing on the beach. You can learn to fly the wing with a skateboard in a car park and just generally get used to sort of the wind side of things. And then you can take a big board without a foil and just sort of learn to sail that board back and forth. There are specific boards for this with sort of a dagger board or center fin, which will allow you to go upwind. It's not really necessary, but it's easier if you can come back upwind. Or you can take a short mast and a foil. That will essentially also get you upwind. Also, the good thing about this, you don't need to be foiling and flying immediately to come back upwind. So you can learn to sail the craft around, learn to go downwind, upwind, pick up a little bit of speed, and slowly work your way up to flying. And usually with short masts, it's very, once you breach, you can sort of touch down on a larger board, just keep going. So it's sort of a very easy and safe way to learn. I would also say that wind foiling is also a quite nice option to learn to foil. However, the equipment side is slightly more technical and bigger. Wind foil boards tend to be larger. Setting up a sail is a little bit more complicated than just inflating a wing. So that's why I would rank it a little bit on a higher difficulty scale than wing foiling. Next along, yeah, then we get into the discussion, what's easier, kite foiling, dock starting, so on. So if you have good amount of kite skills, the learning with a kite and learning the kite foil, especially now with very good boards and very easy foils. We've had over 10 years to develop equipment for kite foiling, so it's really well thought out. It works really easy. So if you have good kite skills, there's no reason why you can't learn to kite foil immediately and then get into foiling through that. Now, dock starting, yes, it's difficult. Let's say that. You need a decent dock. You need foiling skills beforehand. Once you make it on the board to be able to keep pumping. Jumping on the board can be fairly daunting. So it's, let's say, a fairly difficult sport just to learn without any previous knowledge beforehand. That's not to say that you can't learn it. It's just it's ranked above the more sort of difficult way of learning. Because remember, you can learn how to pump once you get up behind a boat. You can let go of the handle and you can learn to pump and progress from there. And then you're sort of more prepared for dock starting, for example. So those are my rankings for the difficulties for the different sports. So just to recap a little bit, if you really want to learn, you want the easiest way to learn, find somebody giving a course behind the boat. That is the easiest way to learn your basics of foiling. And from there, you can progress on to any of the other foiling sports because you will have those basics of how to control the foil. The next sort of question I always get asked is, whatever the discipline, what gear should I get? Should I immediately get some really good gear and new gear and then go from there? Or should I maybe just rent first? Do I have to do a course? So I always think it saves you a lot of time and money if you do a course with a professional teacher, because they have good equipment. They can get rid of all the small little mistakes that you make in the beginning. They can tell you what not to do, what to do, and your learning will progress a little bit faster. Plus, um, the gear that they will be using in your beginner course will be very easy to use, and you'll have success very fast. And then once you're finished with your course, you can sort of progress on to the next level, like slightly smaller boards, for example, for wing foiling. If you're learning to dock start, you can then progress on to proper dock starting equipment, etc., and like that. So you do tend to save a lot of time doing a course. If you do plan to, all right, I'm just going to do the basics in the course I'm going to teach myself. So we'll go by sport now. So behind a boat, if you own a boat and you're going to learn to wake foil by yourself, I would still recommend getting something larger that floats without being pulled. I wouldn't recommend going straight to like a 1 meter 20, 90 centimeter sort of kite foil board for behind the boat immediately. I would have sort of a subfoil, surf foil board first, a little bit more volume, where the boat can pull you at lower speeds with a large foil, and then you can progress there safely. Because the faster you go, obviously your crashes are going to be a bit harder, and the slower you go, you're going to feel a little bit more confident learning. Regards to kite foiling, it's the same thing. If you do course, you'll save a lot of time. If you then decide not to do a course, if you have, I've got good kite skills, I'll figure this out, I do recommend getting a slightly larger board and a decent size foil. For kite foiling nowadays, you've got foils like, if we're talking about square meters, like 1,200, 1,500 square centimeter foils. Those are perfect for learning because you need very little speed and they are very, very stable. So that's one way of getting into it. Same goes for wing foiling. If you do a course, you'll be learning on a very big board, small wings, large foil. Everything's going to be super stable, and you're just essentially going to be sailing around. It's going to be very easy. This is obviously not the equipment you're going to buy for yourself in the end. So, but if you're going to teach yourself, try to borrow or rent if you can. If not, buy something big, at least 30, 40% plus, I mean, your body weight plus 30, 40% in volume. So for most people, that's 100 liters or more. In most courses, you will see people using 150-liter boards just for the first hours or two. And with wing foiling, you progress very quickly. So when you progress onto like a smaller board, you do that very fast. So you start with something like 150, 200-liter board. The next thing, next step, essentially, once you're comfortable with that, would be essentially 100 liters, something like that. And then you're going to be matching your body weight essentially to the board within a couple of weeks. And then for the first year, you can already be on your body weight plus 10%. And that's going to be very good for you for the first year. And then most people then will progress onto body weight equals volume, or actually less. So for example, I am 88 kilos and my big board back there is 74 liters. That is sufficient enough for me, even in the lightest of conditions. I use that for like light wind racing to get up and get going. So once you get up to a certain level, you don't even need such a large board. For dock starting, yeah, large, super glidey foil. That's something you really want to learn on. The hardest part of dock starting essentially is learning to jump on the board. Actually, one of the best things you can practice at home, if you have a sturdy table, is to sort of put your hands on the table and just learn to jump up onto the table, essentially matching where your hands are. So you're trying to push yourself up onto this table and land. Your feet should land where your hands were when you pushed yourself up on the table. Or you can do this on a bench or something like that. And then once you have a certain amount of skills, this can help when you water. Learning to dock start is essentially, I would really recommend that you have somebody with you who really knows what they're doing and can explain to you what you're doing wrong, because there's a lot of things that can be done wrong with dock starting. Typically, people don't jump far enough forward onto the board, they don't have enough momentum, and obviously, with there being a dock involved, there is a risk of injury. And when learning any foil sport, you really, really need to be wearing good safety gear. That means helmet and impact vest is a bare minimum. For like dock starting and so on, I really recommend decent weight, wetsuit boots or even shoes. A lot of docks are not perfect. There's either rocks or wood and splinters and so on. And there's always a risk of falling onto your board or onto your foil. The foils are fairly safe nowadays, but it still can hurt falling onto a hard piece of carbon or aluminum. So I really recommend impact vest and helmet. And helmet is really necessary, especially for dock starting, because if you screw it up, and you will in the beginning, the board will go forward and you will basically fly backwards, and what's behind you, there is the dock. So definitely a good helmet, which really protects the back of your head, because that is the most likely crash on your first attempts. All right, if there are no questions anymore, we will then push on to sort of the next topic. What conditions for the different sports are really good to learn? And we actually haven't talked about is actually the new thing, the downwind foiling. Downwind foiling sort of started taking off quite a lot in the last year. It's not actually something super new. Most of us foilers, we've been doing something similar um, for the last 3-4 years. It's just that now we've started getting the boards to a place where it's like super easy to pump up on flat, and even easier with a little bit of rolling swell behind you, that we're now being able to pump up even smaller high performance foils and to make downwinding with the subfoil a lot of fun. But again, this is one of these things. I actually had a guy trying downwind boards today, and everybody gets surprised. Everybody assumes it's going to be super, super easy. But if you are not an experienced stand-up paddler, it's going to be quite difficult. These new type of boards, they're not very wide. They tend to be very unstable in the beginning. You really need to know what you're doing. It takes some time to figure out your balance on these boards. When I first shaped my first ones, it took me a good hour to really get the hang of it, especially when it was windy. So if you do get into downwind sort of or flat water paddle up foiling, whatever board you get, you really want to spend some time with it in flat water without any wind, because these boards are not as easy to handle as you think they are. Once you get them under control, then yeah, it's very easy to paddle up and get decent amount of control on the waves, and really these efficiency, you really notice how fast these things paddle, how really easy it is to get up. But you need to sort of relearn your basics. Even if you're a very good stand-up paddler and saying, yeah, I'm used to a board that's only 19 inches wide, sure, but 19 inches over 14 feet of board length is a bit different than half the board length and also being 19. It's not impossible, but it is very different. So be prepared, be humbled for the first hour or two, and then progress from there. If you want to start from absolute zero, I recommend you learn to stand up paddle a large normal stand up paddle board first. Get decent with that before you get into buying your first downwind paddle board. That said, if you're a winger, these downwind paddle boards are actually really good for light wind. So you can actually sort of teach yourself a little bit with if you can wing already. But again, it's different for when you are just there with a paddle and there's zero like external stability. That can actually be quite difficult. So if you're not the best paddler, look at larger sizes or sort of the hybrid downwind boards, which are just a little bit wider. Don't immediately go for the most hardcore, like 19-inch board. Okay, so now let's talk about what are decent conditions. So we'll stick with downwinding for now on. So if you want to learn how to downwind foil, you should obviously learn how to paddle these boards. It's really important that you learn the basics. For example, the J stroke. So if you can already paddle, you're gonna have to work on, if you haven't already, on your J stroke to get the board to paddle straight while keeping the paddle on one side. You don't want to be switching around while you're trying to paddle up. And if your J stroke's not good, all you're going to do is start paddling this board in a circle. So work on those with the normal board first, and then in flat water, work on that with your brand new downwind foil board first. And then once you can paddle in a straight line and get your speed, I recommend on a windy day, somewhere flat though, just with wind in your back, learn to paddle this board downwind, gain speed, turn around, paddle it upwind. It'll teach you a bit of control, and then paddle downwind, and then start working on your pumping technique, and then working on combining your paddling cadence with your pumping cadence to get the board pumped up. The bigger the foil you have underneath there, obviously the easier it will be to get it flying. It won't need as much speed. The smaller the foil, the more high performance. It'll be faster and more fun once you get up, but it will take a lot more energy to get up and flying. So keep that in mind. So then move on to wing foiling. What are good conditions to learn in there? Again, flat water, 15 knots of wind is typically what I recommend to people. Flat water, obviously, because it's a lot less movement on the board. It's a lot easier to control the board. And 15 knots is sort of a perfect wind condition for a normal adult with like 75 kilos. You can use a 4-meter or 3-meter wing. It's very easy to control. Everything's working. The wing is almost weightless. It's all very controlled, and it's very easy to progress. If it's very windy and very choppy, it's very difficult to control the board. It might be difficult to control the wing, so keep that in mind. So flat water, 15 knots is sort of perfect to learn in. If you don't have those conditions, try not to learn in too much. I wouldn't recommend learning to wing in over 20 knots for your first few sessions. That can be quite difficult because there's a lot of things happening with the waters. It's very choppy. The wind typically is a bit more gusty when it gets to that strength, and it's a lot more difficult to control the smaller wings too, like a 2-meter wing for beginners. Actually, not as easy as a 3 and a 4-meter. These tend to be the sizes which are the sort of easiest to control, and it's also it's a bit easier to sort of displace, or that means you're sort of riding without flying back to the beach and trying to get back to the same spot that you started. Kite foiling, similar conditions, like around 15 knots, where you can use a small kite and it's flying stable. That's perfect. So if you can use a 7 or 9-meter kite, any kite in that wind will fly. You don't have to use like a specialized kite, like a foil kite or a single strut or a no strut. Even like a 3-strut or 5-strut kite will fly in 15 knots and be stable. And typically the water state is still relatively flat to learn, so it'll be quite easy. Try to learn in very clean wind. Gusty wind and kites and foiling can be a bit daunting in the beginning, but once you learn in those conditions, you will progress very fast in kite foiling. It's got a very sort of shallow learning curve, so you can progress quite easily onto the next step. Dock starting. Yep. Dock starting, we covered that in the beginning when we talked about the gear. It's the same thing. Try to find a dock that has a decent amount of height. A dock that's very low down. It's very difficult to lean over, like bend over and push the board and then jump on it. Typically, your board will actually be higher up, yeah, because you're trying to keep just barely the foil under the water as you're pushing it along to jump on it. So a dock that's very low down is more difficult. A dock that's very high is also not great. Typically, we recommend that people use a little bit shorter masts for dock starting. So if your dock is super tall, it might be that the board is, not at the right height for you. So again, you have to bend over too much to be able to jump on the board. So something like, usually if your dock height is about like 50 centimeters high, that's like perfect. 50, 60 centimeters high is like a perfect dock. find it. If you can't find it, obviously there you will make do. Just try to avoid docks where there's any sharp bits on the dock where you can trip over or like sort of get hung up on when you're sort of running along. Um, and don't start near boats. There's a lot of people learning in harbors and so on. You see a lot of videos of guys dock starting within a couple of meters of docked boats. I really wouldn't recommend that when you're starting because typically when you crash, you tend to kick the board away as an instinct. And nowadays, the foils are so good, the board can travel 15, 20 meters by itself at a decent amount of speed. And you don't want to be denting somebody's property, somebody else's boat when you're doing that. So try to find a dock where there is nothing around you for about 20 meters or so, because your foil can travel that distance when you're starting. Now, sup and surf foiling is a whole different bag. This is one of the sports where I really, really recommend that you do not get into it unless you have a decent level for sup surfing or surfing. It's not something you're not going to learn to surf on a surf foil or on a sup foil board. There are prerequisite skills that you need for catching waves on any board, which you should already have before you even think of going into waves with your sup or surf foil board. There's a lot going on with catching a wave, and then if you're trying to combine that to learning how to foil, that's just going to typically end in disaster, not only for yourself, it could be for other people who are also using the break. I really recommend that you 100% learn to surf foil if you have the prerequisite skills on a completely empty break without any people around you, because you're going to be having some impressive crashes. And no matter what some of the pros tell you, when you learn to sup or surf foil, or even if you're a good sup or surf foiler, use a leash. It's never good etiquette to be anywhere near a surf break without a board leash. If your board gets away from you and hits somebody, it doesn't even need to be a foil board. It can cause a lot of damage. I have more cuts and injuries from other people's surfboards than I do from a foil. I actually have to admit, in 10 years of sup or surf foiling, I have not got a single cut from my own foil. And I've been hit by my own foil quite a bit. I've got loads of scrapes and actually stitches and so on from other people's surfboards or subboards. So that keep that in mind. Leashes in surfing have to be, and I typically recommend do not learn to surf or SUP surf with foiling gear. Learn to surf beforehand. If you're a good surfer, you'll be a good surf foiler. If you're a good sup surfer, you're going to be a good sup foiler. But you aren't going to learn to surf with sup foil gear. It's just very difficult, and it can be quite dangerous for yourself. Okay, so that was my sort of brief talk about how to get into the different foiling sports. If there are any questions or any feedback on this format, I would love to hear it. Just leave those down in the comments below, and we will address them in the next episode, or actually we'll make proper episodes to answer those questions. Next week, we are going to talk about the whole downwind foiling. The gear, the foils, the boards, all gear, boards, foils, paddles, things like that, and then how to some basics on how to learn, and I'll be answering questions on downwind foiling in general. All right, so thanks for listening. Thanks for taking part in this first episode of the Foil Talk with Gunnar. Thanks a lot for Indiana for hosting this and supporting this channel. So thanks, and I'll see you guys next Friday, same time, 8 p.m. GMT. 8 p.m. Normal time, 1900 hours GMT. rock on and have fun this weekend on the water.